I'm walking along and I see this bear behind a log. I say to my brother's ahead of me, and I go, Tom, there's a bear. And he goes, what? And he just keeps walking towards the log. I go, there's a bear behind the log. He goes, what? And he stops, and he looks at me, and the bear stands up, and it's got a 5-pound block of Velveeta cheese in his mouth. But you think about it, we're 4 days hike in. Somebody had to carry that 5-pound block of cheese
and that was going to be so great to have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because that bear didn't carry it for that long.
No.
All right, so we're going across the street, up behind the gate, and then... So I do have my laptop. We can take a look at what we crossed the creek.
Okay, and I brought my iPad to try out.
Oh, good.
Up here.
I like your spiky collar. It makes you look tough.
I started wearing that after I saw a video of a mountain lion attacking a Doberman in the owner's backyard. The only reason the dog survived is because it had a collar like that.
It's functional and it looks punk rock.
And she's a badass puppy. We've been rewarding her every time we come to a mountain lion scrape, or she sniffs it, and she definitely likes to find deer bones. So cracking dog.
Yeah, see how interested she is in that?
It's weird. The detour is weird, but look at those toes.
Yeah.
That's a lion.
That's a lion for sure.
Huh.
And it's pretty fresh.
Yeah.
Because it's Wednesday, and we were here Sunday.
Yeah. Do you have 2 cameras to set up today, or just one?
Just one.
Hey everybody, welcome to the 7th episode of the Go Get Outside podcast. I am your host, Jason Milligan. Yes, I am still your host. You might have noticed the show started a little differently today. Instead of going straight into the open and then coming to my annoying welcome, we started with a little field audio of a few people out doing something that maybe you weren't sure what they were doing. Well, let me explain what's going on. The format is going to be a little different than usual. We're going to go out with Johanna Turner. She's a local here in Los Angeles who is a camera trapper. If you don't know what camera trapping is, it's kind of like candid camera. And if you're really young and you don't know what the hell candid camera is, it basically was the early version of all those hidden camera shows. So a camera trapper is a person that hides a camera out in the wilderness so they can try to get pictures of wildlife when they least expect it. Johanna Turner is one of those hobbyists who does that for fun. So I went out with her earlier this year in Big Tahunga in the Angeles National Forest in northern Los Angeles here. I went out with her friend Dan, and her dog Ripley to repair one of their camera boxes that was destroyed by a bear, and then check on the other boxes that they had in the area, download photos and things like that. So the format of today's show is going to be split between the interview with Johanna, talking about camera trapping, and with the field audio of me tagging along with them that morning. It's a little bit of an experiment for the show. Hopefully it works out. Hopefully everybody digs it. Let's get to that right now.
Drop your camera off on the way in?
I'm going to drop them out off. I'm going to set the camera on the way back.
Okay.
How's that sound? I'm thinking right there. Looking right here.
Yeah, nice angle.
Yeah, because then you get everything coming this way and anything coming out of here.
You shouldn't get any wind. That's nice. This is a real classic lion scrape. Have you seen these before? Call it a scrape. They stop and they go like this with their back feet. They pile up dirt, and then they'll pee on it to make the scent there. So it's a visual signal and a scent signal to other lions. And it's mostly the males that do this. And we think we have 2 males in this canyon right now. So there are a lot of these. Every 50 feet there's another one. So they're telling each other.
So it's strictly a territory marking.
And if they run into each other, they'll fight to the death of one of them.
Is the lion in Griffith Park still around or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. He's still there. He's still healthy.
He's lived in people's basements.
Yeah. He mostly hangs out at the cemetery at Forest Lawn because all the deer eat the grass and the ornamental plants. Mm-hmm. So he just hangs out there and picks off a deer every couple of days and doesn't move around much. He doesn't need to. I'm Johanna Turner. I'm camera trapper. Hiking was the first thing I liked, and then this has grown out of that. And the other term people sometimes use is citizen scientist, because I do give some of the information I get to biologists.
So tell me a little bit about what a camera trapper is and what that means to be a camera trapper.
Camera trapping is a way to do wildlife photography when you're not actually there. So you leave the camera out in the woods for 2 or 3 weeks, and it has a motion sensor on it that will wake it up and trigger it to take a picture or video when something walks by. You have to be able to predict where the animal is probably going to go before you set the camera there. And then after that, it's a whole lot of trial and error.
How did you get into that? Was that just a passing fancy, like, oh, that sounds interesting, let me check that out, or did you come across it some other way?
I went to a class that a biologist gave in Anza Borrego State Park. He was a mountain lion researcher there, and this was about 6 years ago now. So his class that he offered just free to the public through the park was that you could follow a mountain lion biologist sort of through a normal day in his life. And it was all day long. It was 8 hours. And we drove out to a couple of his trapping sites where they set a cage trap to get the mountain lion to go in, and so that they can then tranquilize it and put a collar on. At the cage traps, he had camera traps to see if animals were using the area, the same thing. And I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know that existed at all. We sat down and he got the card out of the camera and he starts flipping through these pictures, and there were bobcats and mountain lion and deer, and all of this had happened in the last couple of weeks, and that was the most exciting part of the day. I just said, where do you get these? How does this work? And he said, oh, you just buy them at sporting goods stores, I said, they're not too expensive. That was about 6 years ago.
So the technology has probably changed a fair bit since then.
Yeah, it has. The very first camera I got had a trigger time of something like 5 seconds, which means that the animal walks by and 5 seconds later it takes a picture. And that was the best you could get at that point. And it took 6 D batteries. It's about the size of a lunchbox and heavy. Pictures weren't all that good. Usually I just got a whole bunch of blank pictures and had to wonder what animal walked by.
Oh, here's a picture of maybe what was a lynx.
Here's the tip of a tail of something. Yeah, it was a long time. It was probably 6 months before I got my first mountain lion picture on that camera.
And you were probably so excited.
Yeah.
And you showed it to everyone you knew.
Oh, yeah.
You're like the mom with the wallet with the kid picture that breaks it out at all the parties.
Yeah, and I'm showing it to... I showed it to the biologist whose class I took, and, he's like, yeah.
He's like, I've seen a million of these.
And he was encouraging, and he's like, okay. And I'm like, but look at it. You can see the whole animal, and he walks right by, and then he stops for a second, and he looks over, and, watch it again. So, yeah, I get pretty excited.
So after you went to that and you found out about camera trapping, how did you go about getting into it?
When I could afford it, and when my birthday came up, I would get another camera, and I started to get more cameras. I took a couple of tracking classes in LA. There's a guy in Orange County, Dick Newell, who has a group called OC Trackers, and he has classes, and then he has workshops once a month where you go out and on some dirt roads and just do tracking together. And so I got better at that. I got better at knowing where the animals would be, and the technology improved. And now at this point, we still do have store-bought cameras, but what we're doing now, my friend Dennis and I are building custom camera setups with really high-quality DSLR cameras. They work the same way. They still have a sensor, and it senses on motion, but the images are a whole lot better quality, and they actually have white flashes so that you get color pictures at night, as opposed to most of the store-bought cameras have infrared light. So at night, the images are black and white. It's getting more complicated, but the pictures are getting really beautiful, and we're starting to be able to make it artistic rather than just oh, there's this animal that lives here.
Right, kind of like the difference between an image that's newsworthy and an image that's a composed piece of art.
Yeah.
So how many cameras do you think think or know, you probably know. How many cameras do you have out right now?
I think 8 commercial cameras and 3 DSLR setups. Yeah, 3. And Dennis is building me a 4th, which is almost ready. He has another 10 regular cameras, and he has 5 DSLR builds.
And so how much work is it to manage all these cameras? Because you have to return to them, check the photos, to replace batteries, things like that.
We have to go to each. We have a couple different locations, and the cameras can only go about 3 weeks before the batteries and the flashes die. And, other things happen to them. They get rained on. Some water can seep into the case.
Bears might attack them.
Bears attack and eat them, and you never know when that's going to strike. We kind of have a schedule going, about 3 main locations, and so every 3 weeks, every weekend on Saturday we go out, and so each camera setup goes about 3 weeks in between times that we check. And that timing works out well for knowing that we're going to get some good animals pretty much within 3 weeks. If there are mountain lions or bears in the area, they'll pass by in that time.
You said there's a camera that's damaged by a bear, right? That you're replacing?
That's right over here.
And how do you know that it's damaged?
We came up on Sunday to check on it. It had been here 3 weeks, and it was hanging off the tree, big crooked angle. There's teeth marks in the case. These are custom built by Dennis Calais. So it's a Canon 60D DSLR, 18 to 35 millimeter lens, nice wide angle. You can see Ripley is all over the scent of the bear, and you can see scratch marks all across the case. He scratched the glass that protects the lens, so I need to replace that today. There's a tooth mark right here. The cables connecting it, the bear had pulled them out and snapped them in half. So we've made now sort of releasable plugs, like 8-inch mini plugs, so that if he does pull on them, he'll just unplug it rather than break it, and we have to take it home and resolder. In the spring, they're hungry and they're cranky. Usually by fall, they get used to having a camera around and they settle down, but always first thing in the spring. We just haven't found anything that works.
So you probably pretty often set a camera up somewhere, give it a few weeks, find out you're not getting anything, except maybe squirrels, and then you have to decide you want to move it elsewhere, right?
Yeah. So we base that on, is it a good area? Is there water? Is there a lot of food? Is there not many hikers, or maybe not any hikers at all, which is the best. And if we go the first 3 weeks or a month and we don't get anything, but there are other signs around, there were good tracks or some deer bones or something that, we may stick it out for a while. And plus the stuff is heavy, so we hate to pack it all up and move it somewhere else. It's like, no, we'll just wait.
Other than things like bears attacking, because I went out with you today, we went to go check some camera traps, and then you needed to replace one that had been damaged by a bear. But I'm sure bears aren't the only problems and the only dangers to your cameras. What other kind of problems do you come across?
All the other animals leave the camera alone. We have problems with people, not very much anymore, because the cameras really are in some hard to get to places. The 2 problems we have with people are, I guess everybody knows what goes on in the forest. I can say it. I mean, there are marijuana grows, and there are people who definitely don't want to have their picture taken. So if we're in a remote canyon with a good water source where people don't go, we're crossing paths with those people. The other thing that can be a problem is just hikers who don't know what the camera is and maybe think they're being spied on by the Forest Service, or they just want to go hiking and be away from people. You don't like to all of a sudden see that something's watching you, and I totally understand that. So sometimes people will cover it up, or if they can move the camera, they'll place it face down so that it can't take any more pictures, or they'll put a rock in front of it or something. But that's pretty rare. And then the pot farmers have stolen some cameras and damaged some cameras, like beyond repair. Hit them with a rock or kick them till they're dead. Basically, if we get any humans on the camera in any of these locations, we'll most likely move. Just just because it's not worth losing expensive equipment.
And it's probably not a great spot for animals anyway.
Yeah.
If humans are there, right?
Yeah. But one of the things that would be great, I mean, especially if, you know, people listen to this and start to learn about it, the people that I have come across who go to my website and see the images, once they know what it is, if they're out hiking and they see a camera, then they usually smile and pose, think it's great. It's like, hey, if you leave it alone, we'll all get to share in these images, you know. So yeah, these were our main cameras for a while. These used to cost about $300, and then they've now become our sort of expendable scouting cameras. So we'll put these in a place where somebody might steal it, and if it, you know,
like on
it's
this
gone,
log.
then oh well.
Yeah. With enough effort, anything's takeable.
Yeah, they want it.
Right. Well, and I guess the danger with these would always be whether the lens is damaged.
Yeah.
It's funny, people don't know how they work.
Mm-hmm.
So when I've had, you know, pot farmers come up to them, they try to break the whole thing. So they don't know they could just pop, you know.
Well, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we shouldn't tell them.
Yeah.
By then, their picture's already taken.
Yeah, and they do know, the pot farmers know what cameras are because they use them themselves. I had one shot once. That was interesting. Shot to death with a pistol. I got the message.
You were telling me a story about some of your other camera trapper buddies like to play pranks on each other too.
Yes, we've gotten pretty creative. My friends have gotten pretty good at it. The very first one, a friend of mine dressed up in a bear costume. The camera at the time was in the Verdugo Hills, which is this tiny little area. There are no bears there, and he did want to fool me. He wasn't just out for a laugh. He went when it was dark.
Oh, he wanted you to think it was really a bear?
Yeah. It was a long story too. He dropped his flashlight at some point, and because he had these big furry mitts on, so he was stumbling around in the dark and he couldn't remember exactly where the camera was. So I've just
so it was instant karma.
Yeah. So there's this really weird looking furry guy pawing around in the dirt looking for his flashlight. Like, what the hell happened? So he said, yeah, it didn't work out the way I thought. The second one that came out really good was my friend Jane, who went to the fabric store, got some leopard print fur, fake fur, sewed it into the shape of a tail, and then went up to my camera and snuck up behind it so that it wouldn't see her, and then dragged the tail in front of the sensor. So I got like this blurry shot of rosette printed fur. And it was believable. I mean, you know, who would go and do that at 11 o'clock at night, way off trail where they know that there are bears? And, you know, so that our first thought was not, oh, this is a prank. Our first thought was, we got an ocelot and we're going to be famous. So the only tip off that we're getting pranked is if one of my friends starts asking me when I'm going to check a certain spot. Oh, have you been back there? What animals are you getting up there? Why are you asking?
Also, if you see any animals that have designer labels on their flesh or tags hanging from their tails, that might be a sign too.
Yeah, nice backpacks, REI
right.
gear.
So what draws you to do the camera trapping?
It adds a real challenge and a real different level of interest than just hiking. And not that I don't enjoy just hiking, I definitely still do. But when you start to learn about the animals that live here and you get to see them acting normally and naturally and calm.
If you came across an animal, that animal is suddenly worried about you, you're worried about that animal, and so you don't get to experience how it reacts in its natural habitat, right?
Yeah, exactly. Most people's encounters, the animal runs away or has to act defensive, and so there's this idea that bears and mountain lions are dangerous because they always snarl, but that's because they're afraid. You know, this is just one way to not affect them at all. They don't get stressed out. It doesn't change their behavior. You just get to see purely what happens when you're not there.
And they have a lot of tea parties and things like that, right? That's what you've learned?
But yeah, bobcats are big ravers.
So what do you do with all the photos that you get? I mean, clearly you throw away a lot of them because they're useless, but the good photos, what do you end up doing with them?
Pretty much just share them on my website and on Facebook. In a couple of areas, we've given them to the National Park Service. Shared them. They've used it to track a couple of mountain lions that were new to the area that they didn't know about. Those guys don't have time to set out cameras and check cameras and change batteries. And that's one of the really rewarding parts of this, is to be able to contribute to a study and contribute to conservation through something that I would do anyway just for fun.
So have you been part of studies and other things by using your pictures? Have they been useful for Forest Service or Park Services or
for the National Park Service, for the mountain lion study in the Santa Monica Mountains, I was able to find pictures of P12, who's the dominant male lion in that area, and his collar, he broke his collar probably fighting with another lion a few years ago, and they lost track of him. It didn't function at all anymore. They couldn't find him either via GPS or by their radio transmitters, the antennas that they hold out just to get a signal and know that he's in the area. So they really didn't know if he was still alive or what had happened. And I was able to get a few pictures of him that showed the damage to his collar, so then they knew he was still out there. They still haven't been able to recapture him. They did start watching a couple of areas more closely that he tends to use, and so he's still alive, and that's been really important for them to know. We also found an uncollared male also in the Santa Monicas that the Park Service kind of had hints that someone else was around, but didn't have any photos or any DNA from. They can get DNA samples from scat. That's another thing I do sometimes, is collect poo.
Don't we all? Isn't that what we're all really looking for in life, just to collect scat? You aren't one of those people who have learned to identify animals by the taste of their scat, are you?
No, but I do sometimes smell it. And you can tell coyote poop from bobcat or lion from the smell.
So describe the scent for us. What differentiates them? Is one tangy, whereas one's musky?
Cat poop universally smells like cat poop. It's a really sharp ammonia type smell.
Anyone who's ever lived with a cat knows that smell.
Yeah, if you have been near a litter box, that's what mountain lion poo smells like. Coyote, which is the only other thing that can look like that, is more fruity, maybe.
For some reason, I thought you were going to say it smells like Reese's peanut butter cups or something.
Roses.
So it smells more fruity. Speaking of scents, let's talk about one of my favorite things about when I was following you out today. So you don't just set out the traps; you also sometimes set out a little bit of bait, something to attract the animals. And I found it pretty interesting, some of the things that you had with you for that.
Yeah, we've tried all kinds of things. The idea is to get the animal to slow down in front of the camera just long enough to get them to and enough for the trigger to go off and to get a couple of good shots, and then they can move on. We don't use food as lures for a couple of reasons. And first of all, it's illegal to feed wildlife in LA and in most places. Second of all, it doesn't really work very well because you tend to get a lot of raccoons and possums. A mountain lion isn't really attracted to a hunk of meat or something anyway. They eat mule deer, and they eat fresh mule deer.
So you're saying they're picky?
Yes.
They're foodies.
Very. So food doesn't work, so we try to come up with other ways to get their attention, and scents that they don't come across in their normal lives work really well. Something like essential oils of sage or something isn't going to do anything. They smell that all the time. But we've tried vanilla extract, Vicks VapoRub, definitely all different kinds of perfumes. The one perfume that works is Calvin Klein Obsession. And that's
Which is what I found so amusing.
Yes, yeah, because we have an expensive bottle of cologne and we're spraying it all over a dead log in the woods. But they go crazy for something in it, so they'll cheek rub on it just like your house cat does on a new scent.
Yeah, because they want to smell that good.
Yeah. And the gray foxes love it, and the bears love anything that smells their sense of smell is super powerful. So anything new is fun for them.
Anything that could potentially be a food item, they love the smell. So don't leave obsession in your car in bear country is what we're learning. Do not leave that perfume in your car.
Don't wear it. And I have another friend who uses Axe body spray, and he said that works pretty well too. Which I might switch over to because that's a lot cheaper.
You may find out that the mountain lions and the bears in the area are too snooty for Axe body spray, and maybe they demand obsession, only the best for them.
It's Hollywood here.
That's right.
I don't know what they like up in Santa Cruz, but...
You were telling me also that sometimes you have some issues with the Forest Service or rangers or things.
Yeah, that it still goes back to people don't know what camera trapping is, really. I did have a run-in where a game warden came across one of my cameras, figured it was put there by somebody up to no good, because that's what happens 99% of the time in the Angeles, is someone's doing something bad. And she actually confiscated the entire setup. So they cut the cable locks, they cut the padlocks, they took everything away. And I came hiking back a couple weeks later to find a note hanging on the tree that just said, "Call me, I have your equipment."
Oh, it wasn't a strongly worded letter?
It was not at that point. So that was terrifying for me because I had put so much money and time and effort into that setup, and I had picked a place that was way off in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know what the warden was looking for, but what she told me is she thought that there was poaching in the area. And my response back was, "How many poachers do you know that have $1,000 camera setups with external flashes? I mean, if I'm just looking for a deer to shoot, it's not going to be this huge elaborate thing." And she said, "Oh, I've never seen anything like it before. I didn't know what it was." And they do require, the Forest Service requires that you have a permit to do commercial photography, but I'm not selling the images. So I've had kind of a go around with them about that, but they just don't have a category for what I'm doing. They'd like to regulate it because that's what they do.
So in a few years they probably will.
Yeah, they'll develop something. But I mean, overall, they haven't been mean to me about it or anything. They're just trying to manage the forest and know what's going on. So.
I imagine at some point you could become very valuable to them because you could aid them in tracking these animals that they need to keep tabs on anyway.
Yeah, especially Fish and Wildlife with, trying to know the effects that the station fire has had on populations and how many fawns are we seeing and how many bear cubs are we seeing in any given year. What is the drought doing to change, habits of animals? Are they starting to move more into the canyons and more towards the water sources, and is that changing the stream side habitat? I mean, there's all sorts of things, and there's no money for actual studies, so no one knows any of this.
Have you started to try to document any of these types of things?
I keep all of the important images. They all have time and date stamps. Many of them have weather. They'll have a temperature and a moon phase on the, that the camera records with that. I have noticed some interesting things about wildlife since the station fire. And this is pretty obvious, but the animals became really densely concentrated in small pockets that didn't burn.
And for those that don't know, the station fire was a fire. How many years has it been now? 6 years? Something like that?
It'll be 5 years in
5
August.
Years. So it was a really large fire 5 years ago here in the Angeles forest that burnt, I don't remember the number, but it was many, many acres of land. And there's still areas now, 5 years later, that are closed off because the Park Service or the Forest Service says they're not safe for hiking, or the area needs to replenish itself before people are allowed into it.
Yeah, that fire was very severe. It took off. It was a combination of weather conditions and drought conditions, and it burned everything to the ground. There wasn't a shred of green for miles and miles. One of the first areas that I had cameras in since then was up around Mount Wilson, because they protected the structures on Mount Wilson. They did water drops and they did Phos-Check drops, and they protected all the radio towers and the TV towers on Mount Wilson. I'd actually had cameras there before the fire, and so since that was one of the first places that opened, I put some cameras up around in the same area and found a whole lot more bears. Mountain lion activity where the same lion would come by every 2 weeks, which is real frequent for them, but their whole habitat shrunk. So they were, crossing the same areas more frequently. We saw a couple of bears couple of bear cubs born, I want to say 2 years after the fire. The mother and both the cubs seem to have mange. They're in really poor condition. The mother was super thin and had almost no fur on her face, a lot of patches of bear spots on her chest. She had some scabby, bleeding little sores on her face. She survived, and one of her cubs survived. And then we were just able to see the next spring everyone looked healthier. And both of her cubs the following spring survived, whereas just one did before. Things like that.
So you get to follow the stories of some of these animals' lives.
Yeah.
And really see how their lives change and when they're doing well and when they're doing bad.
Yeah. And the bears we can identify because they usually have a white patch of fur on their chest that, is a certain shape. So if you get to see that, that's this one,
Do you tend to give them names based on that shape? Like if one has a shape of Florida, you name them Tallahassee or something?
That we do name the ones that we see a lot, but the names kind of come up randomly. We have a mountain lion named King Arthur. He's huge, he's really muscular. You can tell he's been in a couple fights, but he
carries a sword.
He carries a sword. He jousts. So we just said he's the king, he's the king around here, so they became King Arthur. There's a female around, so she became Guinevere. We have a mountain lion we call Jughead, and he was named because he always had a really huge full belly. And there was an old comic book, Archie and Jughead was always eating cheeseburgers.
That comic may be old, but they still make brand new Archie comics.
Do they?
Yeah, if you go to any grocery store at any time, there are Archie Digest in there. I don't know who buys them, but clearly someone does.
So let's get out those wires. Ready for that now. We have to put one pole there, nice solid in there, and then one over here. So let's do that.
So we need. Which way you want to go? This way, or you want to go this way and use this as a mount?
Let's go this way because it helps it. I can
Stabilize
use this
it?
and the log. So the cool thing about these plugs now, we can set this up and we don't have to do the wires until last.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. As long as the bears don't realize that they can pull on that plug.
So is that the sensor is there, and then is that also a flash in the other box? Or?
Yeah, the bottom one is the flash, and this is the sensor. It'll wake up when the animal's right on the bank, and then the camera takes a 6-shot per second burst. So by the time it takes a few steps and has a paw on that rock right there, that's where I want everything to happen.
So does it just continue to fire the entire time that something is in front of the sensor?
Yep. It's kind of hard to do your composition in a way that you could get all angles. You're either going to get one direction or the other.
Before I started coming with Venice, Johanna, I wasn't worried about composition so much as can I even catch something? So they taught me a lot about camera setup.
Well, we were really the same way, up until we started doing this. It was just, I want to see an animal, and now it's going to be, I want some green in it, and I like the reflection off the water, and I mean, get a wild animal when you're not here at all to stand a certain way. Uh-huh. It's tricky. So the blue tape is so that I don't mess up the focus when I put it back in the case. So we set it to autofocus, take a shot, and then turn it back to manual. The autofocus doesn't work at night because there's no light. So we have to pick our focus spot ahead of time.
Once the sensor signals the camera, hey, there's something there, the camera wakes up and starts taking pictures.
Immediately? There's no charge time or anything?
There's a short wake-up time, and it's different with every camera. The Bushnell there is like just under 1 second wake-up time. The other camera I have there that I had hanging here is about a 2 second wake-up time.
So how is this sensor powered?
It has a little half AA battery in it.
Oh, that's all it needs?
Yeah.
Because it's on all the time, right?
And it doesn't send out a signal. What it's doing is looking at all of the temperature. It's looking for a big spike some kind of a rise rate in the temperature.
So it's a thermal sensor.
It's a thermal sensor, so it sees a voltage. It's looking at this voltage, and it's calculating what the voltage is all the time. And so gradual changes don't affect it, right? But then when it sees a spike, some rise rate, and whatever that is that they've got figured out, it sends a signal.
Normal.
Yeah.
So where would you like to see this go? Just for you, for the sport, whatever. Do you consider this a sport? I don't know what you would call this for this pursuit.
Yeah.
Where would you like to see it go from here?
I would like to have photos that are artistically good enough to sell or at least be appreciated as wildlife photography, because I think you can get some amazing shots that would be impossible handheld. You can't sit out here for 3 weeks and wait for a mountain lion to walk by
and get that close to you.
So I'd like to see recognition of it as its own form of photography. And then as far as conservation wise, we're kind of working on documenting some urban mountain lion populations, and if I could document that they were crossing freeways or using a certain chunk of land that maybe somebody wants to put a big development on, it would be nice to be able to contribute to something like that and say, look, if this is a corridor that we've identified, you can't block this off, or if you block this off, you're going to have problems. You build 100 houses right here, you're going to have a mountain lion traveling right through the middle of it because that's all he knows, and it's his only way from this area of habitat to the next.
How many people work with you maintaining these cameras and placing them and collecting photos and everything that's involved?
Mostly it's just Dennis and I. Our friend Dan, who was with us on the hike today, has been along with us lately. He's great. He's a lot of fun, and he's also really good at electronics. So he's helping us figure out battery life issues and wiring and.
Yeah, I imagine the technology is only improving.
Yeah.
And because you were talking about now you take videos and photographs, the video quality and the photo quality I'm sure is improving. Things are probably getting cheaper, I would hope.
Yeah, and as new models of cameras, we're using Canon DSLRs right now, and every year they come out with a new higher megapixel whatever, and it drops the price of all the used ones. Mm-hmm. So we just wait for that to happen, then we go on eBay. And
so if someone wanted to start trying this out, or if someone wanted to help out, what's a good first step for them? Good
first step is learning some basic tracking, learning about animal behavior. There are a lot of good books that can get you started, or go see Dick Newell at OC Trackers. There's also a group called Earth Skills that does classes in Malibu Creek and other parts around LA that does tracking and animal behavior.
Do you know if there's anything nationally, if people say we're on the other East Coast or up north or anything like that?
No, they're only small local groups.
So they need to search in their area and see if they can find something.
Yeah, and then once you start doing that and you have a good idea of where animals go, I would start with a real inexpensive camera. You could get one for about $100, experiment with it, learn what works. You'll have to learn, don't set it in front of tall grass or branches that are going to blow around because you'll get pictures of wind. And there's a lot of, like I said, it's just trial and error, and be patient, because it's going to be a while before you get anything real exciting, unless you're super lucky. It just takes a while to learn the right setup in the right areas.
Well, let's talk about that. What are some of the most interesting animals that you've gotten on camera?
The one that we want the most is one of the smallest species around here is the ringtail. They're a branch of the raccoon family. They're about the size of a squirrel, but they have a really long, ringed black and white tail. And they're completely nocturnal. They're only out in the dark. And they eat bugs and lizards and berries. And I've gotten them on camera in 6 years twice that I can think of now, maybe 3 times if I went back through. Dennis has not gotten any ringtail yet, and we don't know why. We've tried all different habitats. They should be around. We have a friend in the San Gabriel Valley and Big Dalton Canyon that sees them all the time.
Maybe they're really camera shy.
Yeah, so that's, if we get a good picture of a ringtail, we'll be super excited. My personal absolute all-time favorite was I got video of a mother mountain lion and her 2 kittens, and they walk up to the camera. She lays down, and the two kittens nurse on her for 10 minutes or so, and they kind of play with each other. They, try to bite each other's tails, and then they all take a nap together.
And you were able to capture all of that on
It
camera?
was all right in front of my camera. Did not predict it at all. It was just a spot where I knew lions walked by. So that was really, really fun.
So if people want to see these videos and these photos, how can they do that?
Most of the videos are on my YouTube channel, which is called Cougar Magic. And then on Facebook, there's a page also called Cougar Magic that we post updates from Dennis and from Robert and Dan, and whoever gets pictures, we post them there. So every few days there's something fun on there. That's the most interactive. That's a fun way to get questions answered.
So do you run everything through Facebook and YouTube, or do you also have a website or an Instagram or anything like that?
I have the domain name cougarmagic.com, and right now it's just a single page with some of my best DSLR photos. I'll plan to work on that over the summer when I have time and make it a little more detailed.
Okay, well, great. Thanks for taking me out today. Thanks for sitting under a tree next to some ants and doing this interview. So I have some updates from Johanna since we recorded this. She is currently working with the Angeles National Forest to get set up with a permit, and she also is hoping to help them keep tabs on the wildlife in the area and promote conservation with her pictures. So some of that was discussed as a potential opportunity in the interview, and it looks like it's heading that direction, so that's great news. She also is working with Beth Pratt Bergstrom with the National Wildlife Federation. She's trying to help them raise money for the Liberty Canyon Overpass. So I know most of you probably don't go to the website and check out the show notes after each show. I get it. I listen to podcasts. I usually don't check out their show notes either. Pretty standard stuff. If you are ever going to go to the website and check out the show notes, make it this week. We're going to have links to all kinds of things. The Cougar Magic website, this Liberty Canyon Overpass, a special feature the AP did on camera trappers and Johanna. You're going to get to see all sorts of sample pictures of the kinds of things she's getting with these camera traps and some of the videos that she gets. For instance, there will be a video linked to of 3 bear cubs running through frame. You think bear cubs are cute. If you don't think bear cubs are cute, there's something terribly wrong with you. Go to the site, gogetoutside.com/podcast. Scroll down, you'll see the listing for this episode with Johanna. You'll get all those pictures and all those links. Do you want to talk to me or anybody else here at the show, any of the other people at Butcherbird? Do you have something to say about the show? Positive, negative, in between? You want to make fun of my voice, my haircut, whatever? Email us, go@butcherbirdstudios.com. Do you want to call us? Do you want to record your voice in a voicemail for us? You can do that. Call our Google Voice number, 818-925-0106. Hey, while you're doing all this, sending these emails and making phone calls and checking out show notes, why don't you go into iTunes or Stitcher or however you listen to this? Do me a favor. Make sure you're subscribed and then rate and review the show. If you've already done that, you're awesome. You're one of the best people that has ever lived on the planet Earth. If you haven't done it yet, you're not quite one of the best people who's ever lived on the planet Earth. I think you would like to be one of those people. Subscribe, rate, review. Be awesome. That's it for this week, but you should definitely come back for next week. We're going to have Chris Kalous of the Enormo Cast. If you are a climber, I probably don't need to tell you anything else. Chris Kalous is a pretty well-known climber, but he is also the force behind the Enormo Cast, which is pretty much the definitive climbing podcast. He and I met up in Salt Lake City earlier this year, and he let me go hang out in his hotel room and record an interview with him. He's a cool dude. He's funny. He has a way better radio voice than me. Come back next week. Check out Chris Kalous. In the meantime, enjoy your week. Thanks for listening. See you next week.